One of the books that I have been reading recently is the recent book by Andy Weir, after The Martian, the more recent one, called Project Hail Mary. And I'm halfway through that book. And I thought about waiting until I reach the end of the book to do a review, but I don't need to get to the end to do this video because I just want to talk generally about the greatness of Andy Weir, why I think he is an important writer, not just in the sense of being entertaining and fun to read. It's not just he's not a good storyteller in the sense of being entertaining. He is also, his stories are beneficial and enlightening. They reveal certain important things that we might neglect, we tend to neglect in our everyday conversations, in our everyday ways of thinking. So on the surface, Weir's stories are about problem solving, very urgent problems in the context of the science fiction genre. Constructs a situation where an urgent problem needs to be solved, a problem that threatens the life of a single individual in the case of The Martian, or a bigger threat facing Earth in the case of Project Hail Mary. I'll do my best to not include any spoilers in the video. So there's something very special about the way he presents that problem and the process of problem solving. He depicts problem solving, and more specifically scientific thinking and scientific problem solving, in terms of a cultural and collective activity. Even though that activity, the navigation or search for a solution, is done by individuals. But when we look at it, when we think about it more carefully, a scientific process is not an achievement of any one individual. Science is a societal achievement. It is a cultural achievement, a historical achievement. And to emphasize this point, to emphasize the collective nature of science, cultural nature of science, he relies on a very effective method. What is that method? It's a method of contrast. He relies on a kind of contrast. He combines science and technology as cultural achievements with extreme isolation of his protagonists. So the hero of the story, in the case of The Martian and in the case of Project Hail Mary, is put in a situation where he's literally isolated, and that isolation is extreme. So on the one hand, the hero is alone. On the other hand, he relies on an enormous, impressive collective achievement, societal achievement. So the protagonist is relying on science and technology. That reliance, that activity, scientific, technological activity, is presented as a series of desperate acts of desperation that involve lots of risk and lots of uncertainty. So it is not just the case that, a collective activity where you are surrounded by friends and allies, and you're not taking any risks because you're among friends, you're among people who are protecting you. No, you are part of the collective, but you're on the edge. You're on the edge, you're taking risks, you're working with uncertainty. So that's the result of Andy Weir's method, is very upbeat, very energetic optimism. And the optimism of his protagonists, the heroes of these stories, they end up with a kind of irrational optimism. And I don't mean that when I talk about irrational, crazy optimism. I don't mean that there is no ground for that kind of optimism. What I mean is, it's a kind of felt optimism that doesn't demand any further justification. It doesn't ask for reasons. It is what it is. It is optimistic. It is upbeat. It is energetic. So that it's a mood that comes out of that, the combination of relying on whatever scientific or technological tools is available, and that the urgency of a problem to be solved, and being on the edge, being responsible, being burdened by this responsibility. So why do I think it is important? Why do I think this makes Andy Weir a great writer, an important writer for our time? even though this style, this sentiment is not necessarily a new sentiment. It's a sentiment of enlightenment, rationality, but he provides an important and good representation of it, a representation that is not irritating and not dogmatic, because he's a storyteller. So to flesh that out a little bit more, let's contrast it with another attitude about human nature. Another possible attitude, we might be familiar with this, and I'm familiar with it. I've seen people discuss humanity, human nature in these terms. So you might have heard people talking about basics of human nature, the basic fundamental facts about human nature. What are those facts? These are the things that we all share in common, certain human attributes, natural attributes, primal attributes. What are those things that we all share in common? And because we share them in common, these are things that we can connect over. We can connect over things that we share in common because we easily understand. So our need for food, our need for water, our need for sex, our need for safety, shelter. So these are things that we all understand. That's why it's so safe to say, oh, you like that food? You like pizza too? Or you like Indian food too? Let's all get together and enjoy. It's a safe thing to do. It's a very primal thing to do, enjoying food. Other things, other primal tendencies, attributes are our need for affiliation, being affiliated, and connected to that are prejudices, are impulses to draw boundaries and identify in-group and out-group, us versus them. So these are also identified as primal. These are things that we can understand easily, quickly, detect in ourselves and in other people. We can even bond over them. We can bond over the fact that we belong to the same nation or belong to the same ethnic group. So within this picture, if we embrace this attitude, this way of thinking about humanity, human nature, so what does that lead to? What are the implications of that? In that picture, the development of a person, the cultural development of a person, the education of a person, what does it mean when you become educated, when you become cultured, when you become sophisticated? It means that you are reducing emphasis on those basic primal things that connect you to other people. Therefore, becoming educated, becoming cultural, becoming more sophisticated, becoming an individual means becoming isolated. So you're alone. You become unique as an individual. If you become individuated, if you become the expression of what is unique about you, then you're alone. You're atomized because you're cultural. You're losing touch with what is basic. So this is, you might guess based on the way I'm talking, I disagree with this way of thinking, with this attitude about human nature. I think this shows a limited imagination, that we have to accept those basic assumptions about human nature, the needs of human beings, and then the education and culture, sophistication, individuation, those necessarily mean disconnection. That's not the case. And Andy Weir shows with his stories, with the journeys of his protagonists in these two books at least, shows that the limitations of that way of thinking. He shows us a different way of imagining human nature. So what does he show? He shows that when you engage with the world scientifically, and this doesn't just apply to science, it could apply to any other cultural domain. You could talk about literature in this way, poetry. You could talk about philosophy in this way. But he does a really good job doing it with science and technology. So he shows that when you engage with the world scientifically, you belong. You're enacting your belonging. You're enacting your membership. You're connecting when you are doing science. You're participating in a scientific process. You connect to a world that is built over thousands of years by many, many people, countless number of people. Learning science, scientific education can reveal, one of the things that it does is it gives us awareness of problems, some of those problems could be very urgent problems, like problems with the extinctions of species, problems with the environment, environmental catastrophes. So scientific education reveals, potentially, it can reveal a set of urgent problems that demand solution. And we might decide to respond to that urgency, to that demand. And if we respond to that, one of the consequences of that is that we manage to transcend, at least according to Andy Weir's world that he's presenting us with. We transcend those basic primal tendencies, going beyond our tribe, our tribal affiliation, the exclusive nature of tribal affiliation, racial, ethnic affiliation, national affiliation, that the only way for us to bond is in a nationalistic way. How limited is that? He shows that in his scenarios, the usefulness and the necessity and the inevitability of bonding, connecting to other human beings, other creatures, not just necessarily human beings, to other creatures, other living beings, that arising from participating in science and technology, in education. So we can think about Weir's story in that way. We can think about how human civilization, the cutting edge of human civilization is finding its expressions, is trying to express itself through the very individual journey of these protagonists. All right, I might talk more about this book after I finished it. If you'd like to hear more about the book Project Hail Mary, I would recommend it already, even though I'm halfway done with it. It's really great, engaging story, and it has these other aspects that I just talked about. But if you'd like me to do a review, if you'd like to hear that more complete view of the book, let me know. I'll be happy to do that. All right, all for now.